From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good morning, everybody. It's a bit after 10 o'clock, so we'll get started. I'm Wiggins. I'm Director for Acquisitions and Bibliographic Access here at the library. We want to welcome you to yet another in the series of the library's digital future and you. Today we're going to focus on BIBFRAME again. We want to continue to share what's happening with BIBFRAME so that it becomes second nature to you, because we expect this will become a part of many of our lives in the next few months, in fact, years, to make the transition that we want. By the end of this session, you'll have a sense of what we intend to achieve with the BIBFRAME Pilot. As you know, BIBFRAME is the library's model for moving us into the linked data world. Moving into linked data is going to enable the library and indeed the library community to more easily share bibliographic data, our library data, both within the library community and more broadly beyond the library community with the semantic web community, and to make the data that we create more valuable to the world. We expect that BIBFRAME will eventually replace MARC, so that adds another layer of importance to what we want to achieve. For us, to get to that point, though, we needed to have practical application so that we could say beyond theoretical means that BIBFRAME indeed would work for the library and for the library community. Now, that's been the purpose of the pilot, that we want to use our technical staff, our training staff, and our catalogers and those who actually apply and the creation of bibliographic data to show what BIBFRAME can do for us. We've dubbed those who participated or will be participating in the pilot as pioneers, because we view them and those who have prepared the infrastructure, the training, to indeed be the ones who are out front, who will be leading this effort. We view BIBFRAME is one of the important initiatives that ABA, Library Services, and indeed the library will be carrying out in the coming years. The outcome of this pilot is going to help us move into the next phase. And believe me, the next phase is likely to be another pilot or part 2 of the current pilot, because it's going to take a bit for us to get there. In other words, this is just the beginning. While the library is executing this pilot, we also have colleagues at various major academic institutions who are taking the same path, all trying to get us to what we consider to be a brave new world. Now, our leadership here at the library is going to be invaluable to helping us to make that transition. The next several years I view as a very exciting time. It's going to be a challenging time, but it's one that's going to help us be poised to make the library the leader that it has been, particularly in standards and bibliographic creation, bibliographic data creation over the past century. Now, for you to learn more about what we've been doing, we have a distinguished panel who will be presenting, talking to you, and there'll be time for questions to dig a bit more into areas that you'd be interested in. We want to start off with Kirk Hess taking the podium, or maybe talking from where he sits to start us off this morning. Welcome, and we hope you'll be pleased with what you hear. Kirk.
I'm Kirk Hess. I'm a digital projects coordinator here at the library. I started in February, and I've been mostly working on the editor interface itself, as well as a couple other things that support it. We also have this thing called a profile editor. The profiles are kind of mapped to resource types, so things like books, what we call them monographs, because we're trying to use the RDA vocabulary in our case. So what we've done is, by developing the profiles, it has a way that you can pick a particular kind of resource, you can enter in information, and then ideally it can save. We've had a lot of problems with bugs and other things in the systems. The system's not perfect. That's kind of the thing that I always mention, that we're always trying to improve it. So I was going to show one of the things I'm trying to improve, which is a common request from our partners is loading the information. So what happens when you save is one question people ask, and I haven't really publicized this, but basically what happens right now is it goes into this data store that's on our system. So you see there's these links here, as well as there's some RDF. So we actually store the JSON LD directly in the system so we can load it later, and that's one of the things I was going to try to demo here in a second. So the simplest one that you can save is actually by not doing anything in the editor and just clicking save. Some of you have worked on the pilot. So it looks like this. It's not very exciting. But if we go here, so one of the ones that question we have is we want to actually share these with people because they actually want to see what happens. So that was a very boring, incomplete record, description. This particular one, 63, we actually looked at to try to make sure that we had all the information correct in it. So you can see this one's much longer. So back to the bugs. I can't really use the mouse, but you can see at the very top it says empty brackets. I mean, it's not supposed to be like that. So this is one of the ones where I've found out there's something wrong and fixed it later, but the things are kind of stored here incorrectly. There's supposed to be a type there. It's supposed to say it's supposed to say the actual link to the resource. So that's kind of how the API works. Basically what this does is it both saves and loads, and then behind the scenes it's supposed to actually get back into here. What I was going to show was that record that you saw. What we're trying to do is be able to go into a record, and instead of doing create resource, which we've done a lot in the pilot, is actually load resource. So when you can actually get to a list that looks a lot like that list I showed you, you can pick one of the resources and it pops into the editor. So that's one of the main things that I'm trying to work on. Another thing is, of course, this particular save area is not really what we consider our production area. We use this other system called MARC Logic, which Nate has been involved in a lot, and that's another area we're moving to. We're trying to upgrade that system and get that working. So that's really the next step. So a lot of this is interim stuff. It's a prototype. It's not where it's going, but I know I've received a lot of positive comments from everyone on how it's going, so I'm glad that it's working well. And if you have other comments, definitely let us know, and I'm sure there'll be lots of comments in the question area. So I think that's about it for this. I will just go ahead and go on to our next panelist. Thank you.
So welcome to BIBFRAME in Action. Kirk was talking to you about some of the really technical aspects under the hood, which I personally find fascinating. I'm a nerd and proud of it, so that's a fun thing. But one of the things that I want to talk to you about today are some of the goals for BIBFRAME, the scope, and a linked data future. So I'm Jen Baum-Savick. I think I know almost everybody in this room. Nice to see all of you this morning. And I'm a librarian here at the Library of Congress. So what I'm going to cover is just generally what is BIBFRAME. Many of you who have been attending these sessions, it'll be a review for you. You'll already know this, but some of you who are here may still be a little bit uncertain as to what the initiative really is about, what some of the goals of linked data are, and some of the aspects of the pilot for where we are now. As Kirk said, we're dealing with prototypes. We're kind of in the middle of what is the beginning of a kind of long journey. And it's an exciting time, so I want to cover some of that excitement. And then when I'm finished, Karen's going to come up and walk you through the editor. All right, so what is BIBFRAME? BIBFRAME is a leading linked data initiative within the broader environment of the World Wide Web. It's really kind of important, as we've heard, it's a very pioneering effort. We've got, it's something that is incredibly hard to do, but very important to do. And as we start looking more and more at this effort, I kind of wanted to step back even just a little bit and talk to you a little bit about some of the words that we're using a lot with BIBFRAME. one of which is the internet and the web. All right, so show of hands, no judgment, but how many of you are confused about the difference between the internet and the web? Anybody? Okay, there's a few hands that went up. All right, so it's really important to understand this concept because we're using both aspects together to leverage technologies for the internet and the web to make linked data happen. So with the internet, one of the easiest ways to think about it is it's a network of networks. This point, it's global. When it first started, it was a very local effort, started in CERN, and it was just a very narrow scope of people who had access to that type of technology. Today, it is global, and it's a network of networks. And we're using some standards that allow us to communicate all around the world. The TCP/IP is the most, it's the basis of the internet, essentially. So with the web, what we're really talking about there is more of an information space. And again, with the web, it's become global. It's something where we can interact with people all around the world and access documents, pages. We're all familiar with things like URLs. But what we're talking about now with linked data is we're trying to add in some of the semantics to it. We're trying to understand, really have some understanding, have some meaning that goes with it. What you're looking at on your screen is an image of Tim Berners-Lee original proposal where he was going through where they were doing some of it was the diagram of, it's a schematic for the packet switching network. And why this is kind of important is when you start to see the next slide, you'll see how similar it is to what we're doing with growing the web, and then in the following slide, you'll see something more that was actually Tim Berners-Lee's proposal. When we look at the semantic web and we're talking about that, is that another kind of confusing term for people still? I mean, okay, so getting a lot of nodding heads and hands up. Most of us who catalog, semantics, we understand that. We're adding meaning. We're trying to add some context. Semantic web is considered in kind of two different groups. One is the little s, semantic web, and that's kind of the growing web of data and the protocols on the internet, and catalogers and technicians are fulfilling this role by adding data. That's a really important aspect of what's happening with linked data, and particularly with BibFrame. With the big S semantic web, it's the formalized architecture from the World Wide Web Consortium, also known as the W3C. And it's also the data formats that are part of linked data. So the RDF that Kirk was just showing you, OWL, we've been using SCOS here for a long time, Sparkle. Those who were in the initial portion of the pilot had extensive training with this, and so those kind of alphabet soup will seem familiar. The technical staff are filling this role by utilizing the standard architecture and the open data formats. And that's what you're seeing under the hood. That's the part that Kirk was showing you, all of the N triples and all of the coding that may seem a little foreign, but that's what's underneath the editor. So in this image here, it's from the linked data book. I just thought it was interesting, and you may not be able to see it all the way in the back, but the image up at the very top corner is from May 2007, and it's showing just the number of data sets published on the web as linked data. A lot of times we were talking about the URLs a few minutes ago. You would have links to documents and pages, but you really wouldn't have links to the data itself. So the next kind of cloud of it, if you will, is from 2008, and then the next one is 2009. So the more and more we have participation throughout the world on linking this data, the more rich that data becomes. So here is Tim Berners-Lee's envisioned visual of the web, and he is credited as being the founder of the web itself. With BibFrame as a linked data initiative, this helps fulfill Tim Berners-Lee's vision of the integrated web. What you're seeing in this diagram is entities that have relationships, that have context. Right now the web is kind of one directional without linked data. You're having a lot of things being published, but you don't have that context. You don't have that definition of relationships. And a lot of it is just not even available. It's hidden. It's behind firewalls and within data sets that you don't have access to. With linked data, you can actually link not only to the data sets themselves and have that rich understanding of relationships and context, but you can also go into those data sets as well. So with linked data, is that a term also that seems a little confusing for people? I mean, I know we're talking a lot about it, but yeah, okay, some more hands. So linked data refers to a set of best practices for publishing and connecting structured data on the web. It's a topic that I really could go into quite a bit because I just really find it fascinating, but one of the things that is interesting with all of this to me is that about 26 years ago, Tim Berners-Lee had this concept of the web, and it's only been within, say, the last 10 years that we're figuring out how to really maximize the technologies to really be able to have such a richer presence of information on the web and to really have greater knowledge sharing. So what are some of the goals for linked data? Again, Tim Berners-Lee published two kind of important contexts for understanding linked data. One is the 4 linked data principles. He was saying you need to have URIs as names for things. URIs are the Uniform Resource Identifier. So when we think of URLs as the location, we've all gone to loc.gov, for instance. Now you can actually go into aspects of our collection and the data itself and get directly to a named thing. And that's what the URI does. You're also using the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, otherwise known as HTTP, for the URI so that people can look up those names. And then when someone looks up a URI and provides useful information, we're using standards so that we have that interoperability, we have that ubiquity of that technology, and we're really able to leverage the technology stack of the internet and of the web. We're also including links to other URIs so that you can discover more things. And this is really central to what libraries do. We want people to discover the data that we have. We want them to discover the collections we have, and we want to be able to help them make those interconnections and those interrelationships. The image on the other side of the screen is the linked data rating system that Berners-Lee also published, and just to give people a sense of, again, how well they're leveraging those technologies to make that data that much richer and that much more accessible, that much more machine readable and human readable. One of the things that we have struggled with these technologies is that we really haven't been able to make the machine readable aspect do all that it can do. And with linked data, that using those standards, it makes it possible. A couple of other things just to say about that is, let me back up for a second. If all this seems confusing, let me give you a really simple analogy, and this is one that I borrowed from the W3C. You go to the grocery store, right, and you want to buy a box of cereal, okay? Before we had computers, you'd grab your box of cereal, you would know how much it cost by the ticket on the shelf, and you'd pay your cash, and you'd be on your way. Now in an interconnected world, we can scan that box of cereal, and the computer knows how much it costs. They know they can tie it to an inventory, and you can use your debit card to pay for it. All of this interoperability of having standards, technical standards, allow us to make that communication happen fairly seamlessly with an editor, and it just allows you to be able to do it in a much more automatic and proficient way. Something else to really consider too is that I think we've all experienced that we're living in a world where it's just a deluge of data, right? We're producing it, other people are producing it, we need it to do certain things. Maybe you're trying to make travel reservations, maybe you want to buy a book, maybe you want to check something out of your library, whatever it may be, there's just data everywhere. Linked data gives us a way to manage it and to do it in a way where we can share it with others and they can share it with us. It exposes the rich and authoritative metadata in libraries and our partners, and it enables greater online access to library collections and the data itself, as I said, in and out of data sets, which is relatively new. It also demonstrates the need and importance of information professionals such as librarians and technicians managing this data so that we have accurate interconnections, relationships, and it really shows a proven dedication of well-managed data. So in other words, it really supports a lot of what we've been doing in libraries all along. So just as the World Wide Web revolutionized the way we connect and consume documents, It can also revolutionize the way we discover, access, integrate, and use data. The web is an ideal medium to enable these processes due to, again, its ubiquity and its distributed and scalable nature and its mature and well understood technology stack. So the goals of BibFrame as a pilot, there are two primary ones. One is to determine whether the BibFrame model is a viable mechanism for describing resources. The other is to create BibFrame data that the library can expose for external constituents and collaborators in testing BibFrame to provide access for experimentation. And that's partly what Kirk was showing you, some of the experimentation. Things go wrong, it's an iterative process. We're going to need to have that agility to respond to things, but it's going to require a commitment from all of us to provide that feedback. So what's in scope for the pilot now? As Kirk was talking to you a little bit about, there are certain profiles in the editor, and Karen's going to show you some of that shortly. Right now, it's monographs, serials, notated music, cartographic resources, audio CDs, and Blu-ray and DVDs. So you can do original cataloging for all the material listed above as those resource types. We're also going to be looking at testing for RDA compatibility, which is going on now thanks to the great work of Paul Frank and Tim Carlton somewhere out there. But we're also going to be exploring where cataloging, where RDA is not utilized. And we do have that here at the library as well. What's out of scope? The following activities are not in scope for the pilot, and they should be done as you normally would do them. So you'd be doing it in the ILS and as you would otherwise. The editor at this point does not afford a way to handle name or subject authority work, do the bibliographic file maintenance you would normally do, subject or classification proposals, end-stage processing, copy cataloging, minimal level cataloging, or SIP verification. So just briefly wanted to highlight a few things about roles and responsibilities. We've got Kirk and Nate here from NDMSO, and they've been the principal developers of the BIBFRAME Editor. And the editor is the primary tool that we're using for all of this. But as I said, it's designed and developed iteratively and incrementally. And this approach, while it affords agility, it also requires a really concentrated, deliberate, sustained feedback from the users, all of you who were in the pilot. So catalogers and technicians, we need to better understand how the tool is used, the requirements for performing the job, and determine if the tool can be used in the future for creating linked data. A note about COIN, they've really championed and led the training effort. The inaugural pilot group received nearly 6 months of preliminary training, in addition to the modules 1 through 3 for the broader pilot. And they've been facilitating the requirements definition and feedback to the development group. And again, Paul Frank and Tim Carlton have done an amazing job with that. And Les and Ken did a great job with the training as well. Of interest, probably mainly to the group here, is catalogers and technicians. Your expertise and feedback is critical for the success of this initiative. That feedback will improve the tool as well as the overall process for creating linked data. Your active participation in the pilot debriefing sessions is a dynamic way to understand what is and what isn't working, as well as intended. And sometimes you just have to really get in there and experiment with it to know. So when you're providing your feedback, you know to contact Paul and Tim for that. And please keep doing that because it gets directly back to Kirk and Nate. So some of the questions that are being explored, can we input BibFrame descriptions into a BibFrame-oriented system? Sometimes when you're using the BibFrame Editor and you're in the ILS, you'll do your record in the ILS, but then you'll do some of it in BibFrame and you realize, wait a minute, something you did in BibFrame jogs your memory of, you need to go back and change that record in the ILS, so you're kind of going back and forth. That kind of information is helpful. We're trying to make a clear and useful dichotomy of the work and the instance. That's an RDA thing, so people will know that. And just some things that make the interface a little bit easier to use, things like drop-downs. Are the labels clear and useful? Is the searching adequately functional as it's implemented? And can the MARC records be transformed for cataloger or technician use? You'll also see that there are some things that we're not exploring now, things that are going to be, to be determined in the future. So that leaves out things like reference access, acquisition information processing, record distribution, the concerns of it anyway, and the holdings records and looking at the shelf listing and that kind of thing. So just to sum up, this is, as Beecher had said earlier, it's really an exciting time. This is an opportunity to be involved in a major digital initiative from the early stages. The work can be frustrating and confusing at times. I know I personally have experienced that, but it's, as he said, it's also pioneering. One of the reasons that this hasn't been done earlier, bigger, better, is because it's hard, and we're figuring it out. So join us in that frustration and confusion and excitement. All right. So for those who are interested in BibFrame and are not yet directly involved, I invite you to explore in depth other efforts to do it as well as BibFrame. BibFrame.org, you can familiarize yourself with the initiative if you haven't done it already. But there's also some great information out there from the W3C. There are some others I'd like to highlight for you, and I have to give credit to Les Hawkins, who's sitting right there, for the Link Jazz example. I think it's one of the best ones. I love playing with this site. So go play, explore, see how rich and compelling linked data can really be. There's also some fun ones to play with at the BBC Music. And then I've also been exploring New York Times as well. So it kind of gives you an idea of how we're doing it, but also how it's being done elsewhere, and just really the power of it. So now we're going to hear from Karen, who's going to walk you through the editor. Thank you.
I'm Karen Hill, and I'm going to just demonstrate the BibFrame editor that I'm using as one of the current pilot participants. The editor is divided into 3 parts. It is to correspond with the RDA and the BibFrame terms, the work elements, the expression elements a little further down here, the expression elements, and the instance and the manifestation. So there's 3 sections. In addition to that, a person can choose what sort of a resource they have, so that there's different default elements on a source. If we choose notated music, go down, whoops. For example, it'll have a section that says notated music already filled in, some different fields, form of musical notation. So that's the reason for these different choices that a person can make depending on what type of a resource they're going to be cataloging. I'm going to choose the monograph, and I'm going to choose the one called work instance because that's the full form. And there's 2 different types of entry fields. There is a field like this with the little plus sign to the right. It's called a direct entry field. And then there are these types of fields, which are called the dialog fields. I'll click on one of those first, take a look at it, and if I wanted to enter the principal creator, I'll choose a person, and I can type in a name here, and it will search the authority file. It should bring up a list. Okay, here's the person I want to select. Or enter. Okay. Now, if I didn't have an authorized access point, I could enter it right here. This little yellow pen would allow me to, normally it would allow me to make a correction. I'm just going to try that there. Say that I put in, there probably is a Karen Hill in this, but it's not me. Would allow me to then come in and make some corrections. Or if I don't want to use that, I can click on the trash can, and then I'm just going to go back here and if I'm cataloging a record, I've found the person that I want. She's been entered in, And now I'm going to save the changes. The next step is for me to search for the relationship designator. And save changes. Okay, that is a demonstration of the dialogue field. And I also want to point out that there are links to the RDA elements. It'll bring us right into RDA and allow us to read about, what that field is for. Yeah, it's a big help. Now here's, let's see, an example of, it's also a dialog box here. I'm just going to put in this. And so I would click on the little plus to set it, then save changes, and you can see that it's been entered in there, but you can't really see the number. Now here's a direct entry field. I'm just going to put my code in there and the date. Whoops. And in this case, I'll just click the plus sign. And that's been entered in. If, as with the other fields, if I wanted to make a correction, I can click on the pen. It's going to bring it back up, allow me to make a correction. Or I can click on the trash can and delete it and start over. I also just wanted to show you how to enter in a subject heading. Subjects are entered here in the work area. And it works similar to the name search. I can enter in, say I'll enter in a country. And normally that would just give me the country. Let me try something else. Okay, then I would choose what I wanted. Now, if I wanted to add a subdivision, I could come in here like this, set it, and now I've used an authorized subject heading. I've added the subdivision to it. Let's see. So then, as you can see here, I have the default content type text that's already in the form. We don't fill in every field for every book. Maybe some books don't have an illustration. Under the instance manifestation, quite a few of the descriptive elements would come in here. For example, let's see, there's quite a few fields for series statements. There's the ISBN we would enter. If for some reason there was also an invalid ISBN, we would enter that as well. Qualifier, hardbound, that sort of thing. Okay. Here's the media type and the carrier type. Extent would be pages. And something else, if you'll notice, I'm not necessarily entering in the ISBD punctuation to separate the fields because we're just entering in different fields. But in some cases, I might use it, for example, in the statement of responsibility, if there's colons and that sort of thing separating out people, I would use it there just to make it clear. And then, say we've entered everything in, we want to take a preview. The preview is going to show the actual code that's been created. And for example, let's see, here's my code. And there's a lot of code. Here's the text, which was a default. And there's the pages. And this is a The code that's being created is called the raw serialization of data, and it can be displayed in a lot of different ways, and I have one example. So that would be perhaps a record that would appear in a library catalog. Okay, that's all I have. Let's see, I guess next.
This is just an isolated tool that we're testing, and you need to just remember that. What it's going to look like in the future, I don't know. And I was just going to tell you the panel's ready to answer any questions you may have. So.
Well, we want to say the possibility is there, so
Yes.
that's why I see them taking notes, and
Yeah.
this is part of our moving forward.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Well, I would say that if it's available on the web, then, and you know how to programmatically get to it, then it should be linkable. So if you're on a particular subject that has a number, then if there is a number for that paragraph in class web or wherever, then you should be able to link to it.
For those who'd seen the editor several months ago, this view of it is substantively different in the best possible way. So I heard the cheers of joy about the RDA links there when I saw them, I went, woohoo. So, maybe that's something that comes in a, iterative release in the future. But to get it to this point, it took several months of diligent work. So yeah, it goes on the list of possible enhancements, I think.
Karen, since I know you with Icelandic, sometimes you need special characters.
Yes.
Can you put those in? And also, if you need a whole different alphabet like Cyrillic, can you put that in?
What we've been doing so far is just copying it from the ILS into the editor, and depending on how we create the diacritics, that is having an effect on whether it's bringing in the authorized access point. So I think there's still some work being done on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about transliterating the whole record?
I don't know. That I don't know. I'm sure that it's all going to be worked on for sure.
We've had this question more than once. I just wanted to comment that because this is a web browser and it's just using, you can type in any language you want, and it saves in Unicode. So that's part of the way it works. I mean, it should support whatever use case for languages that we have. But we definitely need to test them. So that transliteration one is a good question, because that's both typing as well as how the editor actually serializes it as BibFrame.
I'm Regina Reynolds, and I'm head of the ISSN section in the U.S. Perl Division. And I noticed that it seems there's a departure from the BibFrame model in that we have work, expression, and instance/manifestation. And I'm real curious about that because I thought at one point I saw only the work level and the instance level. So how is that after all the explaining that I've done to people that yes, BibFrame took the model with the whole FRBR hierarchy and compressed it into this work expression as one level and instance manifestation as another. So I'm surprised. What's going on?
Well, it is a good question, but you also saw a whole bunch of RDA there, but we're not storing anything called RDA. We're only storing BibFrame. So what you see on the screen is is intellectually how you're organizing the information. What gets stored in BibFrame is a work for the work and a work for the expression and an instance for the instance. So we store the data for an expression in a BibFrame work. Does that make sense?
And Paul Frank really is the one who designed a lot of this. He had a very good feel for what the catalogers knew and what they had learned in their training with RDA. And so he made the captions. He did all that work with having the captions linked to the RDA in support of the cataloger, what he knew the catalogers knew. And also he put into it that information, that dichotomy he knew they were looking for, even though when, as Nate said, when it's stored in BibFrame, those in fact are two works. The work is a work and the expression is a work, which is the way the BibFrame model works.
All right. I need to think about that a little more. Thank you.
Really, the RDA stuff you see on the right 2/3 of the screen is just to help you. You went through 4 years of RDA training. You know those terms. You know what the element is called, theoretically. And so, yeah, you're creating BibFrame stuff, But you're doing it because, as Nate said, intellectually, you're thinking RDA. What's the RDA term for this element? What is the RDA instruction number or sub-instruction number? So I just think of it as a way to help you find what you're getting to.
In the MARC world, I think, I'm Sally McCallum. In the MARC world, I think we're used to having the screen more or less have captions for the data elements, or numbers really for the data elements that we learned, and they were not related one-on-one or closely to the cataloging rules, but we knew them. Whereas I think with the BibFrame, you can make the input editor have any sort of captions, any sort of a configuration you want. It will all go to the same configuration when it goes into BibFrame, when it becomes a BibFrame RDF document. So it's going to be, the whole environment's going to be a little different, and it frees up in some ways. It freed up the people who were working on the editor interface to put RDA terms and RDA descriptions and RDA links all through it, even though BibFrame is not just RDA. Looking at that editor, it looks like it is. It's not. It's down underneath, it's not at all.
Well, and again, just to add, we're looking at that editor not only being used for RDA, but also for schemas that are not RDA. So while your point is well taken and all of the input as well, we want it to be flexible enough to accommodate both. And I also really appreciate the streamlined approach to it, because those of us who not only still do some of the metadata work, but also have other duties as assigned, that very infamous statement, you're wearing different hats. And so when you can come right into the editor and see what you're supposed to be doing and have those links particularly to RDA, it's very useful. And I agree, having the subject heading information would be great too. But
my name is Mark Simon. Just a minor question. I noticed when, I was just curious, when Karen was entering the subheading, she did the 2 dashes, and I assume that the system is going to translate it into whatever the BibFrame equivalent of delimiter X is.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that.
We're
not using the delimiters because that's a MARC notation.
Okay, but I'm just wondering, I guess I don't understand yet how the new system is distinguishing between this, delimiter, like delimiter X and delimiter V mean different things.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And if you're just doing double dashes, so you have no way of communicating that.
It's true. I don't know the answer to that, but I know that the delimiter system is a MARC notation,
right,
not a BibFrame notation. I mean, maybe there would be a different way if we thought that was important, that we would show this is a form subheading, this is a
right.
Right.
So I'm Nate Trail, by the way. Subject headings are going to be very difficult in this environment because of the fact that you can have any subdivision you want pretty much, and you can order them in any way you want, basically, as far as the computer is concerned. And we have only established certain ones as big long strings of multiple subparts. So there is no URI for your favorite subject heading necessarily with all of its parts and pieces. But there probably are URIs for each of the chunks of it. So we could do something more like FAST, where there's a URI for every subcomponent, and pile them all together, but then you have to keep track of the order. So there are very difficult questions that we have to figure out. Right now, the editor is not able to explore all of those options at the exact same time. So we could do a pull down for a single URI or for a multiple URI, but we can't mix and match and have part of it be literal and part of it be a URI in the current state of the editor. So that's something that we really need to work on.
so maybe just something to add, because Nate explained that very well. Well done. But one of the other things about that is you can't have ambiguity. And so one of the things when we're looking at with the URIs is that you can't have something mean more than one thing. It really has to be unambiguous. So that may point to a potential resolution, as Nate was talking about, is to have something that is specifically defined as, a genre or a form or, whatever. So that's something to be looked at, but it's a very real question that we have to consider and try to figure out.
But it also is true that when you select a form or genre, what gets stored is in the MADS RDF schema, and it says this is a form, or this is a genre, or this is a topic, or geographic. So we know when you pick it off the list what you've picked, and you can say, I wish to look for a geographic if you want. So the system has the ability to store all that. And one of the other things that we're doing in the pilot is to take a look at how people have used the editor. So we'll be examining and looking for those hyphens to see, all right, what kinds of strings are people putting in? What are they doing with this editor so that we know how to improve it in the future?
As Nate says, we're using MADS RDF, which is a RDF, Resource Description Framework schema, and for the subjects and for the names. And that's what we have in ID, which is sort of the resource file. But it was very difficult in RDF, in fact, to encode the subjects, to keep them in the order. I think that's something that librarians and catalogers are particularly keen on, is that I don't want to just have these 5 pieces of this subject. I want them in this order. And that is not easy in RDF. And so we had to work around that and use some things in RDF that are a little bit controversial in order to be able to preserve that kind of information.
I'm Miraneza. I wanted to just ask a question about RDA and the editor. I think, and this is not clear in my head, so I'm trying to work it through my own head. So RDA is extremely granular. And then we have just a few fill in the blanks, sort of. And so I'm just wondering if we in the future, cataloging in the future, are going to limit ourselves to what's available right there and not go into all the detail of RDA. I'm just kind of thinking through. I don't know enough, so maybe I'm wrong. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Well, actually, we're working right now on this. The vocabulary, the RDF vocabulary that's used in the pilot is the one that we've had on the table for about a little over a year, and we call that 1.0. We're now working on 2.0. And as soon as we have 2.0, which will give us a better basics and patterns for how we want to style our RDF, because RDF can be styled in many, many ways. Once we have that, then we will probably be expanding out into more details and getting in more details. Right now, the vocabulary, we didn't make it this big when it was still being formed. We made it this big. And then once the core is set and the patterns are known and understood and accepted by the community, it's not just we understand it, but the community has bought in, we will then, I can see it developing out in various ways, developing our vocabulary out, adopting other vocabularies to be used with our basic vocabulary, all sorts of ways that one can go into a great deal of detail, or one can go into less detail, whichever one you want.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if RDA is not going to go through a transformation, RDA itself, in order to work with this. That's something that I thought about, but I'm not sure.
I personally, from the observations of being in the classroom with Tim and Paul, for Module 3, this was not so apparent in Module 1 and 2, do feel that there are going to be concessions made along the way. Now, we have to realize we work in a global environment. There are other people experimenting with BibFrame and in other different types of systems. We're going to have to reach agreements. I don't know what this means to the future and what it means to standards. But yes, I do think down the road, RDA and whatever the tool is, BibFrame or whatever other system, are going to have to make concessions to work together. But what exactly they are right now, I can't tell you. Or let's say, I wouldn't want to tell you because we're very much in the pioneer stage. It's far from set at the moment. I should have said I'm Judith Cannon from COIN.
And let me just add that RDA was developed not in the linked data environment, but it has a lot of good features that we can pick up on. And so RDA will change probably. BibFrame will change, is going to change, and the two of them will will change each other to some extent. And but as Judith said, I wouldn't want to guess where.
I'm Lucy Barron. I'm head of Scandinavia, Baltic, and Central Germanic section. My question is more about the editor itself. I guess I thought when we were going into a linked environment that this was going to make things better, faster, cheaper, whatever, for catalogers. As we all know, there's a lot of cataloging data associated with the numerical identifiers, the ISSN and the ISBN. And I kind of thought that we would enter these numbers and it would pull in the data into the editor that the cataloger can then just manipulate. Is that in the future?
I like it, Lucy.
Well, it is definitely in the future. What we have tried to do is where we know there are controlled lists or destinations that have more information about something, we go and link to it and allow you to look it up. But right now, there are not necessarily big quantities of RDF data just sitting out there waiting to be linked to. There is no, you can't use the ISSN to go look up an RDF resource and pull back the information about that serial yet. So when there is that data, then we can do that. One of the things that you could do today is with an ISBN, you could click on Amazon and get something back from them, but it's not going to be RDF. And so somebody has to do the transformation from HTML or whatever the resource is at Amazon that is their data source in order for that to happen. So it's definitely in the future. And it will be a lot faster when more of this stuff is available online.
So I'm just back from an ISSN international meeting where we talked exactly about getting the ISSN data into RDF, into open link data. So we'll have to open it up, which it is not right now. We'll have to get it into RDF, but it is all being very intently discussed and actually planned for. And the idea of pulling that in with the editor and then building upon that really makes a lot of sense and adds to the value of the ISSN work that we're doing. So forgive me for jumping ahead, but it was so tied to what Nate just said.
Just maybe it's something to add to that too is that I was at a conference in the spring and there was a pretty dynamic presentation from OCLC about linked data, and they were basically taking a lot of their existing records and converting them to RDF and linked data. So again, we're at the beginning stages, but as we have more and more partners, as we have more and more collaboration and more cooperation, you get that much more data, it's that much more rich, there's more stuff to not only link to, but to pull in, and that kind of automation is going to be very welcome, as we've all said.
Caroline. Hi, Caroline Sakuchi. Two questions. One, is there any required data that has to be put into this? Is there anything that says, oh, you haven't done this, therefore this record is not valid? Is there any plan to make any sort of requirements?
There isn't right now, but there is in RDA, of course, core elements that we have to add. So there's that. But are you talking about like a validator?
Well, that was leading to my second question, which is there any validation for fields?
I don't think so.
For instance, an ISBN validator or an LCCN validator?
I don't think there is right now.
Any plan to think about that?
I don't know.
To reduce mistakes? Potential mistakes? So those were sort of the questions. They were sort of basic, but I was just wondering if there was any sort of requirement that in order for a record to be considered complete, But you're saying it needs, harks back to the RDA requirements for a core record. Okay, just curious.
Oh, do you want to go?
I was just going to make a quick comment with it, and then I'll be quiet. I think the other thing to consider is, again, we're at the very early stages about this, but if you're entering your record in the ILS, that's sort of your baseline system, right? So you're looking at the data you would have there. Then you enter it into the BIBFRAME Editor, and we're making comparisons. What's working, what isn't working, what needs to be improved. So right now that validation is still done with utilities, through the ILS. But again, I think we're just trying to go with those two main goals of what BibFrame is doing now, and one is, does this work for this type of description at this time? And then you build in, you incrementally build in other things that you need.
So all of the fields, you said there was 10, 15 different options that you can select, are all sort of available, and if you select them, fine. If you don't, fine. There's no message that comes back you didn't. Okay.
That's right, cataloger's judgment.
Cataloger's judgment. Cool.
Couldn't resist. It had to happen.
I like it. Thanks.
Carolyn, I just want to add that at this stage, we don't have the ability to go back and make corrections to a BibFrame record. What's happening is the master file is the ILS, and that's where people are starting first of all. If they go into the BibFrame and they do their work and they hit save, there's no ability to bring it back if they say, oops, I made a mistake or I left out a field. Mm-hmm. We do want to share this data with the wider library community, and Beecher Wiggins has assured those persons in the pilot, and if he wants to say anything in a minute he can, that he will put out a statement that these are their BibFrame records, there was no editing ability, and they're not perfect master records. What they are is BibFrame records that you can study and look at and get some idea as to how the system works. But obviously, if we ever go into production down the road with BibFrame, all of this sort of thing is going to have to be resolved. So,
I have one other question. This is related to the subject strings. I guess there was a project a year or 2 or 3, time sort of evolved, so I don't know how long ago it was, to validate strings so that for copy cataloging purposes, if someone clicked the validator, it would say, yes, this is a valid string. Are those going to be able to be useful at all for your purposes when it comes to the subject aspect with the order of subdivisions? Or is it, because it's in MARC, still not useful?
What is it that is a product that could be used?
I'm wondering if those validated strings that were created for the purposes of copy cataloging, so when someone uploaded a record to the ILS, that string was valid, not individual pieces of it having to figure out whether it's valid or not. But the string was already validated, and there are lots of them in the database. And I just wondered if that would be something that could be useful, since they already are in the prescribed order. Okay, someone correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I think that happened a few years ago, and they exist in the master file. So I just wondered if that would be something that could be useful for the purposes of having valid subject strings without having to build them.
Yes, you're right. They're all pre-built then. Is there a way to tell one of those records from one where it hasn't been validated, or do you think that all subject strings in the
Anyone from RTSD want to speak about this?
I'm gonna comment here, but I wanted to refer to my colleagues in PSD. What Caroline's talking about are authority records that were created for commonly used subject subdivision strings based on bibliographic records in the LC file.
I see.
So they generally are conform to free-floating subdivision policies, although authority records were created for validation purposes. But what I want to be clear that everyone understands is we're not saying that the order in one string is up for question. There's policies that say exactly how a subject string should be, and if it's not in that order, it's incorrect. We're talking about the order of subjects in a bibliographic description, the first one being the most important, the second one secondary, the third one third. That's the issue we had with the editor, identifying which should be first, which should be second, which should be third. There's no question that subject subdivisions have to appear in a certain order. And that was the purpose of creating those validation strings. They are searchable in LCSH. So they'll come up in the editor, and they can be selected as if they were an authorized form created by a cataloger.
Yeah, that's right. So I think they already are being used is the answer to the question. Because everything in ID is what you see when you start typing. So if you wanted something that was really long, you could type the whole thing, and when you're 3/4 of the way there, it would come up, and you could say, that's the one I want.
Thank you, Paul and Nate.
I'm Gail Gao, China Section, ASME Division. According to my observation, BIBFRAME works well for Roman languages. What about the scripts and the characters Oriental languages? Will the editor be compatible for all these languages? Because usually we enter two parallel in each field. One is Romanized, the other is a character or script, if you will, and which is difficult. We can easily enter it, but what about the display? And the other thing is that when we, in the lookup box for name authority, person's name, I would like to see not just list of names. I would like to go into the file to verify the person. Because, for example, Chinese name, if you spell them out, doesn't mean anything. You need to look at the characters itself to identify if it's the correct person or not. So I would like to raise that question for BIBFRAME to consider our minor languages because we're in the same environment. Thank you.
So, Kirk, have we seen any foreign language in the data that you've seen in the file system?
I haven't looked really for this specifically.
If you have an emulator, you can type into the fields, but I don't think we've really done a study of how people are doing that data entry. You can also copy and paste into it. I mean, it's all UTF-8, so in theory it's possible, but it would be good if we had people actually actively testing that.
Yeah.
If you want to do name authority verification, you should be going to the authority system for now. It's not inside the BibFrame editor. So if you're doing lookups, you should go to id.loc.gov or you should go to authorities.loc.gov and make sure that that's the authority that you're interested in. It's not what we have now is a editing tool or a data creation tool. It's not a full-fledged ILS system. So there are pieces that you have to go outside the system and then come back in order to make a full cataloging description.
I want to comment on your first question as well. I'm Kirk Hess, by the way. I don't think I introduced myself the first time. Voyager has some specific limitations on using non-Roman script they implemented a really weird workaround that doesn't work very well, and it affects the workflow for this. So you like see that, but you don't really know that's what's wrong. Whereas ideally, if we're using UTF-8 to store everything, we have a lot broader choices in languages and character sets and scripts, and so you're not going to see that specific, I don't know, bug, I would call it, but it's not. They don't think of it as bug, they think of it as a feature. So it actually comes up when we try to transform records from MARC into BibFrame. Sometimes we actually get a bunch of garbage that comes in, and it's kind of related to this. So it's something we're going to have to look at, and we really could use use cases of here's a specific workflow we need to work on it. We can actually tell you, but right now I don't know, and I'll look for the language thing, see what's in there. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, and just to add, as somebody who does do foreign languages in different scripts, so Cyrillic is one that I've worked in quite a bit. It's still a separate process. To Nate's point, this is not an ILS. It is not an integrated library system. It doesn't have all of the utilities you would expect to kind of tie in and bring data in as we've been doing. So it's still a multi-part process, which is less than ideal, but it's because we're at the beginning stages of trying to just see, does this work even in the most basic, manner? So if you're doing a record in one form of Chinese, you're still going to need to use the transliterator. You're still going to need to import that record into ILS. You're still going to need to copy and paste. It's painstaking. I know we talked about how it's frustrating and confusing. That's a great example of where it's frustrating and confusing. and you have to put it in, and then we're trying to see what isn't working well with that. And I agree with Kirk. I mean, if we could really leverage UTF-8 there would be some ways that would make things a little bit easier, a little bit simpler. I think that's the long-term goal, that's the long-term vision, but we're at the very beginning of this path. And as far as looking up the name authorities, I think we all would really love to see that happen, but that is, again, much more in the future. Right now, we're having to work with the ILS doing all of the work in there first, includes all of your searching, all of the things you would normally do. You do everything there first, and then you move over to the editor and see if you can replicate creating that record.
Steve Folsom, German section. Nobody really talked about serial records at all. Problem with serial records is they're always in process. So things always change with serials, the frequencies change, the issuing bodies, the publishers, variant titles are added, all of these things are going on. So it seems like you need to be able to update these serial records very frequently. So I don't know if you, how you plan to address that, because you were saying earlier that basically once you've created the record, you can't bring it up and make changes to it. So that kind of limits the usefulness of the serial records. Multi-parts would be another situation where you have to constantly make changes to those records.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that we're doing is creation, and as Kirk said, he's working on calling up an existing record and allowing you to edit. So that will come soon, but it's still not integrated with id.loc.gov, and that's another step that we have to do. Take the data in BibFrame that was natively created and import it so that you can view it alongside the name and subject authority data and ID. And that's a longer-term vision, but it's not too far off. So yes, we will be able to edit things that you see in the system, and today's version of that is incomplete.
And just for clarity's sake, we would need to do that for all records, because we come in contact with new data every day. So your points are well taken for serials, multi-parts, multi-volume work, whatever. But for your regular old monograph, if you have a print, whatever format you have, you're going to need to update it, and the authority work as well, should that come to fruition in the future.
Okay, so I was at this international meeting, and I did give a presentation with broad outlines about BibFrame and RDA, and someone almost stumped me. I hope I answered it right, but I told him I'd get better information. BibFrame. Why do we need BibFrame? Why can't we just encode our RDA elements in RDF? So how do we answer that?
Okay, well, I'll take a stab at that one, because I was hoping to be a little more clear earlier, but my notes were hidden. So the thing is, remember when I started talking earlier, we're talking about how BibFrame is part of a larger effort here. It is one initiative of linked data. So BibFrame is just what we call our version, and RDF is part of the underlying framework to make that happen. So again, you're leveraging technologies that are, really well proven over decades with the internet and with the web, and adding in that framework to be able to create semantics, to be able to create that sense of relationship, and be able to identify very specific resources, the data itself, which is not something we have a lot of on the web right now. So BibFrame is just our flavor, but there are other flavors out there. There's the linked JAS, which Les found is a great example. New York Times is doing their own, OCLC is doing their own. Everybody's doing their own flavor of linked data. We just happen to call it Bibliographic Framework and shortened it to BibFrame.
So can we say, which I took a stab at and said this was my take on it, that BibFrame is to standardize the library community around a flavor of RDF that we're going to use for encoding our RDA elements? Does that sync up with anything we're trying to do or not?
I wouldn't want to speak entirely on behalf of the Library of Congress on this point, but what I would say is that the way I perceive it, and my true sense of it is the library continues to be looked at as a leader worldwide among libraries. And we are renowned for our collaboration, our cooperation, our cooperative programs. So people are looking to us to lead, to make a stand and try to work something out. This is a rather large, complicated experiment, if you will, that may lead to a tool that can be used in production and shared with others around the world. We're not quite there yet, but we're trying to lead in a very difficult environment. And it's just our take on it. There are other takes out there. Again, OCLC did something very similar, but also very different.
Yeah, and NLM is doing something very similar, but a little different. So this is an attempt to provide something that others can use so that we can develop it cooperatively. Okay, I wasn't
Teachers
too,
nodding.
I would
for
extend
myself,
that.
but yeah.
I would extend the answer a little bit by saying that RDA is more of cataloging rules, and BibFrame is a container, just like you can have AACR2 and put it into a MARC format, MARC structure. And lots of people will be able to use BibFrame for more than one type of library or museum description, RDA rules being one of those reasons for typing the stuff in.
Okay, I called BitFrame the suitcase and RDA the clothes you put in them.
There you go.
Well, and it's really the linked data that's the close. And so that what you see under the hood of the editor, that RDF and all of the semantic web technologies that make that possible, that can be reused and linked to by other flavors of linked data. So it's not, while it's the container, it's also in a way container-less. Is maybe, I don't want to overcomplicate it, but that data you can reuse and link to, that's one of the beauties of it, is that it creates a web on top of the web and through the web. It makes it a much more 3D kind of relationship.
We want to thank everyone for joining us for the session. I hope what I said at the beginning, that you'd have a better idea of what we were trying to accomplish with this part of the pilot and what we expect to have. In closing, I'll just say, just to loop back to some of the questions and points that were raised in terms of the standards process and what impact what we're doing will have on the standards development, both in terms of linked data, RDF, as well as RDA. RDA is important to us because that is the set of instructions that help us formulate the content and the data that we input into whatever structure we use. Yes, we will have an influence on that because, one, we are a key component of the Joint Steering Committee and the development of RDA. So there likely is to be some sort of collaborative evolutionary change in the standardization that we use going forward. We definitely will be changing BibFrame as we go forward in terms of making it more compatible to what we need to do. The other thing that we did mention here is the collaboration. I mentioned that briefly in starting out, but we're working with the PCC community. That's going to have a big influence on RDA because RDA is the set of instructions that underpin PCC. I also mentioned in passing the partnerships, and the partnerships of those academic libraries, linked data for libraries, linked data for production. It has an acronym that seems to evolve during a single conversation, but it's all the 6 libraries, Stanford, Harvard, Cornell, Columbia, and Princeton. And they're all experimenting with a flavor of BibFrame. I think the important thing here is that it is the BibFrame model for the library community, and we'll continue to fine-tune that to make that work and usable for the Library of Congress and for the library community itself. So we want to thank everyone who took part, and I am particularly pleased. I don't show excitement very much, but I am excited about this, and all of these are part of the ABA structure to help us advance the library in this important realm. So I thank them again publicly, and we appreciate your showing up for the discussion this morning. This will be the beginning of several discussions and presentations like this so that we all have a better understanding, and as you can see, this is indeed just the beginning, and I just am excited about the potential of what we'll be able to do with this. So with that, thank you and good morning.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.